Hello everyone, welcome to Hanon Epoxy and Craft. Today we are talking about something super important, epoxy resin mistakes and how to fix them. If you have ever worked on an epoxy resin project and it didn't turn out the way you wanted, you are not alone. Many people face problems like sticky resin, uneven surface, or even color issues. But don't worry, I will show you the most common mistakes people make when working with epoxy resin and more importantly, how you can fix them. If you are excited to learn, give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Hanon Epoxy and Craft for more helpful videos. Now let's get started. Alright fellas, now let's talk about sticky resins. This is one of the most common problems, especially for beginners. You pour your resin and wait for it to cure and then it's sticky or soft. Super frustrating, right? Here is why this happens. The first thing is you didn't measure the resin and hardener correctly, or the second issue is because you didn't mix it properly. And also the third part of the problem is the temperature in your workspace was too cold. So how can we fix those kind of problems? First, always measure the resin and hardener exactly as the instructions says. Use a digital scale or a proper measuring cups, but don't guess it by yourself. And the second thing, what you can do to avoid those kind of mistakes and problems is mix it thoroughly for at least 3 to 5 minutes and scrub the sides and also the bottom of your mixing cup to make sure everything is combined and mixed. Also, lastly, you have to make sure your workspace is warm enough. The ideal temperature is between 22 degree and 25 degrees Celsius, or in Fahrenheit, 72 degree Fahrenheit to 77 degree Fahrenheit. So the resins cure best in warm conditions and warm places, so make sure your workplace is also warm enough to do your epoxy project. But if your resin is already sticky, you can sand it down and apply a fresh layer of properly mixed resin. So the problem solved. Next, let's talk about color mixing errors. This happens when you use the wrong type of colors or add too much pigments to your resin, so it can cause weird textures or even make your resin not to cure properly. How to avoid it? Now let's talk about this. Always use resin compatible pigments like mica powders or alcohol inks. Don't use water-based colors, they just don't work with resin. Also, start with a small amount of color. You can always add more if you want a richer color, but you can take it out once it's overdone. So the pro tip is here, test your colors in a small batch before working on a big project. This way you will know exactly how it looks. Uneven surface are another common problem. Your resin project ends up with bumps or waves and it doesn't look smooth as you're expecting. So let's talk about why this problem happens. The first problem is when your workspace isn't leveled well, so this issue can be raised. The second thing is you didn't spread the resin evenly and also air bubbles got trapped during the pour. So let's talk about how to fix or how to avoid this kind of issues and problems. So the first thing what you can do is before you start your resin project, you have to make sure your workspace is leveled. Also, you can find inexpensive leveling tools online or at hardware stores. Also, when pouring resin, spread it out evenly using a brush or heat gun. Also, for air bubbles, use the heat gun or a torch. Hold it a few inches away from your resin surface and gently pass it over to pop the bubbles. Just don't hold it too close or you might burn the resin. So you have to hold your heat gun inches away. Now let's talk about resin overflows. This happens when the resin spills out of your mold or over the edge of your project. So why this happens and also how we can solve it, let's talk about this. Sometimes this happens because when you pour too much resin on your project and also when you didn't seal the edges properly, this kind of issues can be happens. So how can we avoid this? To avoid this, pour slowly and stop just below the edges of your mold, and resin naturally spreads out, so don't overfill it. You have to just pour your resin slowly on the center of your project, then resin naturally spreads out to your project's edge. And if you are working on something like a table, use masking tape or create a resin dam around the edge to keep it contained. It's a simple trick that saves you a lot of cleanup. One of the saddest things is when your beautiful resin project starts to turn to yellow over time. So why this happen, and also how can we solve this? Let's talk about this now. So why this happens? There are most commonly two problems that raises this kind of issues. The first one is exposure to sunlight and also using a low quality resin. So how can we solve this? Always choose high quality resin with UV protections. It worth the extra cost. Also, protect your finished project by keeping them out of direct sunlight. You can add a UV resistance top coat for extra protection. Finally, let's talk about rushing the process. Epoxy resins takes a time. If you try to move it or touch it before it cured, you'll ruin the finish of the project. So how can we avoid this? By following the resin manufacturer's curing time and be patient on your project. Plan your project so you are not tempted to rush through it. Also remember, good things takes time and epoxy resin is no exception. And that's it. These are the most common epoxy resin mistakes and how to fix them. I hope this video helps you to avoid these problems and create an amazing project. If you have found this video helpful, please give it a like and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to Hanon Epoxy and Craft for more epoxy tips and also for tutorials. Also, let me know in the comments what's the biggest mistake you have made with your epoxy resin. I would love to hear your stories. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, practice makes perfect, and with these tips, you'll become a resin pro in no time. See you in the next video and have a good time.